Is members in the back at least here a little bit okay? Yes. Hello everyone. Just want to let everyone know that we know a lot of people are coming, and there's still some member of the community who are signing in. So we just want to ask for your patience. We are here, and as soon as the member of Congress and the ambassador come, we will invite them in. And also because we have a room full of community members, and we just ask that during the program, if you could silence your cell phone, if you could keep your side conversation to the minimum, so that everybody can hear what's going on up here in the program. Kính thưa quý cô chú bác, trước hết là ban tổ chức xin kêu gọi cái sự thông cảm của tất cả quý cô chú bác, là vì cái buổi gặp gỡ ngày hôm nay có cái sự hiện diện rất là đông, và đông hơn ban tổ chức dự đoán, cho nên hiện nay nhân viên của Coastline Community College đang cố gắng đem thêm ghế vào trong hội trường để cho quý vị, nhất là quý vị hiện nay chưa có chỗ ngồi, sẽ lát nữa đây nhân viên của Đại học Coastline sẽ đem ghế thêm vào. Và vì cái đông đảo đồng hương đã đến tham dự ngày hôm nay, chúng tôi cũng xin kêu gọi cái sự hợp tác cũng như là giúp đỡ của tất cả quý vị, là trong lúc chương trình chúng ta diễn ra, kêu gọi tất cả quý vị giúp cho ban tổ chức chúng ta tắt cái cell phone của mình, cũng giống như là chúng ta giới hạn những cái trò chuyện, những cái cuộc đối thoại, những cái cuộc nói chuyện của mình với người kế bên, để mà chúng ta giữ cho cho mọi người có thể nghe được cái chương trình ở trên đây. Và chúng tôi xin cố gắng khắc phục những cái khó khăn, và xin cảm ơn sự kiên nhẫn cũng như là giúp đỡ của tất cả quý vị, và chương trình sẽ bắt đầu trong thời gian rất là sớm. Xin cảm ơn tất cả quý vị. Vâng, kính thưa tất cả quý vị, một lần nữa chúng tôi xin phép là chương trình sẽ bắt đầu. Bây giờ trong một vài giây phút nữa thì Đại sứ Ted Osius cũng như là dân biểu Alen Lowenthal, dân biểu Ted Osius và dân biểu Loretta Sanchez sẽ vào hội trường để chúng ta bắt đầu cái buổi gặp gỡ ngày hôm nay. Xin cảm ơn các bạn. Và chúng tôi xin giới thiệu kế tiếp là nữ dân biểu Loretta Sanchez cũng như là ông đại sứ Ted Osius. Please have your seat. Xin quý vị Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the community town hall in welcoming U.S. Ambassador to Vietnam, the Honorable Ted Osius. Without further delay, I'd like to go ahead and start the program. Chúng tôi xin phép được bắt đầu ngay chương trình gặp gỡ ngày hôm nay để chúng ta không mất thêm thời gian của buổi báo của tất cả quý vị. Vâng, thưa các anh chị, trước hết xin cho phép chúng tôi được giới thiệu thành phần của các vị dân cử có mặt ngày hôm nay. I'd like to first acknowledge the presence of our dignitaries, elected officials who are here with us today. Aside from the member of Congress that we just introduced and the ambassador, we also see the presence of the mayor of the city of Westminster, where we are, Mayor Tom. We also see a member of the city council at Westminster. We have Mayor Pro Tem Sergio Contreras. We have Councilwoman Monty Rice. We have Councilwoman next door city, we also have the presence of Mayor of City of Garden Grove, Mayor Nguyễn. We have Council Member Frank Cuội. Và nhiều viên Pháp Người cũng là Chủ tịch Cộng đồng Người Việt Quốc gia Nam Cali. Xin chào mừng. Next to introduce from the City of Farm Valley, Council Member Michael Vaughn. From the Westminster School District, Trustee Jameson Powell. From the Garden Grove Unified School District, Trustee Vice President Mr. Loretta. And if I miss any elected official, please let me know. And the reason I want to give them the special attention is that we also have the presence with us, Dr. Prisky, the President of the Board of Coast Community College District. We also have the presence of Dr. Adrian, the President of Coastline Community College. We have the presence of Vice President Ms. Christine Nguyen of Coastline Community College. And we already introduced him earlier, but just want to give him an acknowledgement. I'm sorry, I apologize. I just saw State Senator Jalen Nguyen just came in. I'd like to introduce the former Senator, State Senator Lou Correa. And without further ado, I'd like to bring up Westminster Mayor Tree Todd to have a few words of opening and to introduce Congressman Lowenthal. Mayor Tree Todd.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the City of Westminster, it's my honor to welcome Ambassador Osius, Member of Congress, and all of you to the Leach House Center of the City of Westminster. First, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Congressman Alen Lowenthal for organizing this town hall meeting to give all of us an opportunity to have a direct dialogue with Ambassador Osius. I truly believe that there will be many concerns from the community regarding human rights and religious freedom in Vietnam. I also want to thank Congress members like Royce, Dana Rohrabacher, and Loretta Sanchez for being here with us and supporting the community to fight for human rights. It is my honor to share to you all that we're so lucky to have a good Congress member, Alen Lowenthal. He had a strong commitment to voice his concerns about human rights, and he stands for the community. With that, it's my honor to introduce our freedom fighter, Congressman Alen Lowenthal.
Thank you, Mayor Treetop, for those wonderful remarks in this introduction. It's a great honor for me to be here to have this town hall meeting in the great city of Westminster. Thank you, and thank everyone here for coming to this town hall as we welcome our United States Ambassador to Vietnam, the Honorable Ted Osius. This is better. Welcome, Ambassador, to Little Saigon, the home of the largest Vietnamese community outside of Vietnam. We're so honored, as you've already heard, the local officials that are here. I'm not going to go through it again, but all the city officials and the school board for being here, because they understand that this is such an important meeting for us to have the opportunity to speak to our United States Ambassador. And I also want, before I go too much further, to thank and acknowledge Coastline Community College for their wonderful hospitality, to the board president of the Coast Community College District, Dr. Lorraine Prinsky, my friend, also to Dr. Loretta, the president of Coastline Community College, and also to Christine Nguyen, who is the vice president. Thank you for your support. Thank you for letting us use these facilities. We are truly, truly honored.
Congressman, if I would just quickly recap real quick. Tất cả quý vị, Alen Lowenthal trước hết chào mừng tất cả quý vị đến buổi gặp gỡ ngày hôm nay, cũng như là cảm ơn ngài Đại sứ Ted Osius, Đại sứ Hoa Kỳ tại Việt Nam đã ghé thăm Little Saigon, là thủ đô của người Việt ở hải ngoại lớn nhất ở ngoài Việt Nam, và chúng ta cũng rất là vui có sự hiện diện của các dân biểu Hoa Kỳ, và xin cảm ơn một lần nữa đến lãnh đạo cũng như là các ủy viên của học khu Đại học Coastline đã bảo trợ cho cái buổi gặp gỡ ngày hôm nay.
We have the honor today of hosting Ambassador Ted Osius. Ever since Ambassador Osius was confirmed, he's worked closely with me to ensure that human rights are the top priority of the embassy in Hanoi. I met the ambassador when he was actually being sworn in. I went to the State Department when he was being introduced as the new ambassador and being sworn in. The first thing we talked about that day was human rights, and the ambassador committed to coming here as his first visit to talk in Little Saigon about what is going on. And so I think we owe the ambassador a warm welcome. So
Lịch sơ một thôi là từ ngày mà ngài ngài Đại sứ Ted Osius được Tổng thống Hoa Kỳ Barack Obama bổ nhiệm đến nay để trở thành Đại sứ Hoa Kỳ tại Việt Nam, thì Dân Biểu Alen Lowenthal đã gặp ngài Đại sứ và đã nói về vấn đề nhân quyền, và ngài Đại sứ đã nhận lời cái lúc đó là sẽ đến thăm Little Saigon ở một cái cơ hội sớm nhất, cũng như là ông rất là cảm ơn Đại sứ Ted Osius đã từ đó đến nay đã làm việc rất là gần với lại Dân Biểu Alen Lowenthal về lĩnh vực nhân quyền tại Việt Nam, và ngày hôm nay ông sẽ cho chúng ta biết những gì đang xảy ra ở Việt Nam.
you know, this year marks many, many milestones. Obviously, one of the major milestones for all of us is that this is the 40th anniversary of the fall of Saigon during Black April. We don't forget these events. They have shaped who we are, and they mean so much to our community. But we're also here to look forward. How do we begin together to remember the past, to fight for human rights, but also to begin a real reconciliation process between the diaspora, all the people that fought for freedom, left Vietnam, and what's going on in Vietnam today. So we are here today to forge a new beginning. And that's why we have invited the ambassador.
Vâng, thưa quý vị, chúng tôi xin phép là chắc cái chương trình để mà tiết kiệm thời gian thì chắc chúng ta cũng xin phép quý vị chúng ta giới hạn cái giơ tay để chúng ta tiếp tục cái bài viên văn để chúng ta dành nhiều thời gian lát ở đây cho quý vị đặt câu hỏi. Xin cảm ơn quý vị. Kính quý vị, hôm nay đánh dấu 40 năm kể từ khi ngày chế độ miền Nam Việt Nam Cộng Hòa bị bức tử cũng như là Saigon thất hữu đã 40 năm, cũng như là năm nay cũng là một cái năm có rất là nhiều cái dấu ngoặc lịch sử, những dấu mốc lịch sử, và chúng ta không có quên những cái sự kiện quan trọng đó trong lịch sử của chúng ta, và chúng ta vẫn sẽ tiếp tục tranh đấu vì nhân quyền tại Việt Nam. Nhưng mà đồng thời chúng ta cũng sẽ nhìn tới tương lai về những gì chúng ta có thể làm được để chúng ta tiếp tục cái công cuộc tranh đấu này. Và đối với các vị dân cử cũng như là ông Đại sứ Ted Osius, làm sao tiếp tục tranh đấu đại diện cái tiếng nói của cộng đồng người Việt ở hải ngoại này.
You know, as we all know, everyone in this room knows, Vietnam continues to trample religious freedom. It does not allow for peaceful dissent. It holds countless prisoners of conscience. Yet also at the same time, Vietnam is asking for greater and closer relationships to the United States. And there is no more important part of that discussion than for us to stand up if we want that relationship, if they want that relationship, to fight for human rights in Vietnam, which does not exist today. And so that's why we're here.
Hiện nay chính quyền Việt Nam đang rất là muốn gia tăng thương mại với Hoa Kỳ qua như là cái hiệp ước TPP, nhưng đồng thời Việt Nam còn là một quốc gia không tôn trọng nhân quyền cũng như là đàn áp những cái quyền căn bản của người dân. Cho nên đây là cái cơ hội mà lúc mà chúng ta cần phải nói với chính phủ Việt Nam là chúng ta không chấp nhận cái đó, và chúng ta cùng đứng lên để tranh đấu vì nhân quyền tại Việt Nam.
You know, it's all of our duty, and I'm not just talking about those up here, the elected officials. It's everybody's duty to call for Vietnam to respect human rights. And I will continue to fight and work with my colleagues in the Congress and to work with the ambassador to make sure that the Vietnamese government hears our concerns. And that's why we're here to have this dialogue today. I'm very thankful that the ambassador has come to visit us and hear our concerns, and I look forward to what he has to say.
Và bên đây không phải là chỉ là một cuộc tranh đấu cho các vị dân cử ngồi trên đây thôi, mà đây là một cuộc tranh đấu chung của tất cả mọi người, cùng có cái sự tham gia của tất cả mọi người ở đây, và chúng ta sẽ cùng nhau tranh đấu cho những cái giá trị mà chúng ta tin vào, như là giá trị nhân quyền, và làm sao chúng ta tranh đấu cho vì người dân Việt Nam thực sự có được nhân quyền ở tại Việt Nam.
You know, at this time I'm going to invite my colleagues in the United States Congress to provide their opening remarks. You know, all the members of the United States Congress that are here today are no stranger to our community. They have all been tirelessly working for the Vietnamese American community here in Little Saigon. They've been great friends, they've been champions for the community on many issues, and particularly, as we all know, on human rights and democracy for Vietnam. First, I would like to invite to come up to speak my dear friend and the chair of the committee that I serve on the chair of Foreign Affairs, Chairman Ed Royce. And before he comes up, I'd just like to say, frequently, and I mentioned this at lunch, frequently people talk about the United States Congress as being not able to get things done, to be dysfunctional. I'm not going to get into that argument, but I will tell you there is one committee in the United States Congress where we work together, where we have great leadership, and where Democrats and Republicans are proud to be members of that committee, and that is the leadership of Congressman Ed Royce, and I am pleased to introduce my friend, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Congressman Ed Royce.
Vâng, thưa quý vị, chúng tôi sau đây sẽ tới phần phát biểu của các vị dân biểu Hoa Kỳ có mặt trong cái buổi gặp gỡ ngày hôm nay. Và trước khi chúng tôi đến phần của dân biểu, I also like to acknowledge that Congressman Dana Rohrabacher just entered the room, và dân biểu Dana Rohrabacher đã đến chúng ta. Và sau đây xin quý vị chào đón ông Dân Biểu Osius là Chủ tịch của Ủy ban Ngoại giao Hạ viện Quốc hội Hoa Kỳ, Dân Biểu Osius.
Nice to see everyone here today, and let me welcome the Ambassador Ted Osius here to Orange County, and let me say also that it is wise that he is here in Orange County, California, because the best input, the best advice, I think, can be obtained from the Vietnamese community here. The Vietnamese American community has given me over the years tremendous insight, and I want to thank State Senator Janet Nguyen here with us for a lot of her ideas in terms of what we can do to change the situation in Vietnam. Because I think all of us that have looked at the problem, realize that the fundamental answer to this is to have a government in Hanoi that respects the human rights, the religious freedom, the right of a democratic system in Vietnam.
Chúng tôi xin giờ dịch sơ tiếng và phát biểu của Dân Biểu Osius. Trước hết ông ta chào mừng Đại Sứ Ted Osius đã đến thăm Đông Sài Gòn, và ông ta nghĩ rằng đây là một cái sự lựa chọn rất là tốt, vì tại Đông Sài Gòn, Orange County này là nơi mà ông sẽ lắng nghe được rất là nhiều cái ý kiến chính đáng, rất là nhiều cái ý kiến quan trọng về cái mối quan hệ song phương giữa Hoa Kỳ và Việt Nam. Cũng như là ông ta nói là đối với ông, cái vấn đề căn bản và cái vấn đề căn bản nhất tại Việt Nam là một cái chính quyền không có tôn trọng nhân quyền, cũng như là một cái chính quyền đàn áp những cái quyền căn bản của người dân Việt Nam, và đó đối với ông là cái vấn đề căn bản mà chúng ta đang đối diện phải.
I spent time in Eastern Germany years ago on an exchange program, and I saw the impact that the broadcasts were having on young East Germans. And I think we can do this without translation. I think people understand conceptually here what was happening in East Germany as a consequence of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and of VOA. And those broadcasts were increasingly moving that society in a way in which they were demanding political freedom. And you could actually see it across the cities in Eastern Germany. You could see it all over Eastern Europe. And the consequences of that was to create a new environment in which change came. Now, this is what I want you to think about. We have had years of pressuring the government in Vietnam, and I've carried a lot of legislation to do it. But the reality is that they are still today, if you ask Human Rights Watch, they are still treating political prisoners the same way they were. They're treating people, in the words of Human Rights Watch, like animals, putting them in cells if they're political prisoners, and putting them in those cells with hardened criminals, and encouraging the criminals to beat up the students who might have blogged about human rights. The time has long since come for us to use Radio Free Asia, and I've carried a lot of legislation to get the transmitters up and broadcasting into Vietnam, but we need to use that as a tool in real time, every day, the same way we did in Poland and in East Germany and in Czechoslovakia, to give the truth to the people in Vietnam about human rights, about religious liberty, about the way they're being mistreated, in order to put pressure on that government. Why? Because today, when you see the polling coming out of Vietnam, you see that 92% of the people in Vietnam want closer ties with the United States. Closer ties with the United States. When they contrast that question, do you want to see closer ties with Beijing or closer ties with the United States of America? You see a lopsided number, with 70% of the people saying, we want those ties with the United States. That's what we want. Why? Because it's the values here. It's freedom of speech. It's freedom of religion. It is the foundation of this system. That's what we need to be teaching in Vietnam. That's what we need to be broadcasting. And that is why I am so glad the ambassador is here. Because yes, as Alen said, the fundamental first principle has to be that we in the United States stay true to our first principle, which is human rights. And we need to find ways also You know, if we can figure out a way to open the internet in Vietnam so that U.S. internet search engines have the ability to go into that system in Vietnam. And there is the possibility of us doing that. There is the possibility now of us doing that. If we can push for labor standards in Vietnam so that there are labor unions in Vietnam, if we can push for environmental changes in Vietnam so that you don't have a situation where Beijing sends down a couple of people in the People's Liberation Army, they cut a deal with somebody in the government in Vietnam, and all of a sudden you see strip mining in the Central Highlands. And all of a sudden you see it poisoning the water table. Well, these are the things that we need to negotiate and push for in Vietnam. And frankly, at the end of the day, the ultimate point is freedom of speech. The ideals is what is so powerful. I watched young East Germans who had been mesmerized by the propaganda from the state change their opinion of the future they wanted for themselves. And I know that if this community stays engaged, just as I was a younger man, people told me, oh, things are not going to change in East Germany. Oh, yes, they did, and in Poland, and in the Czech Republic, and they will change in Vietnam. Let's make sure it changes in Vietnam. Thanks for staying engaged. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, my colleagues. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Royce, for inspiring us. Next, I'd like to invite Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez, who is the co-chair of the Congressional Caucus on Vietnam. You know, I'm in my second term in the Congress. This is my third year. And when I came to the Congress, I looked for mentors. There has been no greater champion of human rights and speaking out for the people of Vietnam, for democracy, for freedom, than my dear friend, Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez. And I am honored to call my
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I want to thank you, Alen, for putting this together. I don't know if the ambassador knows this, but back in 1997, when I took the seat here of the district, we actually invited the first ambassador, United States ambassador, to Vietnam to come and we held the first community forum right here in the little Saigon area. That was Pete Peterson. And you were there. You were there in Hanoi during that time. And I know, so a little birdie told me last night that you had a frank discussion with many of our wonderful Vietnamese Americans here, and that things can get tough when we have these discussions about what is really happening in Vietnam. And I've got to tell you that Pete Peterson, he had an earful when he came 18 years ago. We haven't stopped that. Since then, we've had Ambassadors Berghardt, Marin, McCulloch, Scheer, and now you. And so it's a tradition, and it's a tradition to hear from the Vietnamese American community. And the reason we do this is because your family members are this tie to our families in Vietnam makes it the utmost importance for our community to fight for human rights. We would fight for human rights for everybody in the world. But when it's our family, even more so. we are impatient to see progress. So in the year 2000, the embargo came down. We gave normal trade relations to Vietnam. President Clinton went to sign the trade agreement. I know, I was standing next to him as a symbol of the desire for human rights. Then we put Vietnam, the government, not the people, the government, on particular countries of concern for their egregious ways of going after religious leaders and religious institutions in Vietnam. And then President Bush cleared that so that we would agree to Vietnam going into the World Trade Organization. I was against all of these moves, I have to tell you, but it happened. And every time the Vietnamese government said they were going to be better about human rights. That's what they said. Clinton, Bush. Now we come to the Trans-Pacific Agreement. And of course, the government of Vietnam says, oh, we're going to be better. But we know the truth. We know. So, how do we fight for these human rights? How do we get you, Mr. Ambassador, the power and the foundation for you to walk in and try to get these human rights? That is what we are here today to talk about. You have been there. For a long time, you have been watching Vietnam. For a long time, I have been watching Vietnam. For a long time, my colleagues have been watching Vietnam. Now you're watching Vietnam. We're more eyes on Vietnam. But how do we change the conditions of Vietnam? It's hard to stand here. I am glad that my colleague Ed Royce brought the issue of the bloggers and the internet, because I have met with the Googles and the Yahoos and all of these to try to figure out how we keep the internet open, especially for the young people. Remember, the older we get, generalizing, the older we get, the less we decide to go to do a fight, right? Experience, time. But the young people, they are the ones that will bring about the true changes, and it must come from inside of Vietnam. So they must be connected to us, who are going to continue to push, to give them the courage to fight and to finally change what is going on in Vietnam. I would like to alert you today to a particular concern. The concern in the incident in the Hai Dong province. It frightens me to have seen this short video showing the woman's torso under the bulldozer. When the protest over the land compensation of the industrial park. It frightens me that these things are happening and that the government of Vietnam is getting away with this. I know that now this victim is in the hospital and we are monitoring what is happening. But it is exactly that type of fear and recklessness that is hurting our families in Vietnam. So, I am here to say that I will continue to work with my colleagues, regardless of party, and we will continue to fight. I want you to hear from this community because they have their ear to their families in Vietnam. And I want you to know that we are here to help you to make that fight happen because we are here and you are there more days than not. And believe me, if I can get a visa, I will go to Vietnam. I will.